Hello, everybody. How's your GCAP going? Excellent. Great to hear it. So thank you for coming. I know that this is a really late in the day talk, and I know that that is immediately exhausting. So thank you for being here. Any yawns from the crowd, completely understood. I know it's not about us. Any yawns you see back, it's just because it's contagious. I'm sorry. Cool. So we're here today to talk to you about approaching diversity, equity, and inclusion in a holistic way, primarily based on the work that we currently do at Sledgehammer Games. So we're going to introduce ourselves so you know kind of who's talking to you, and then kind of run you through what we're going to talk about today. You want to hit the space? Perfect. Cool. So this is us. Those images are so big, I think they're actually bigger than our physical forms, which is quite funny. My name is Alayna. I am the Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Manager at Sledgehammer Games. So I've been at Sledgehammer in Melbourne for about 4 years now. I started off as a producer, and now I'm managing our entire Diversity, Equity and Inclusion department across about 600 people globally, 4 different locations. And as part of that, manage our DE&I strategy at this studio. I work alongside a bunch of people at Activision Publishing and then all of our different Call of Duty studios on the different ways that we're all managing DE&I a little bit differently. But for Sledge and for this big global group, I am kind of leading that department. And then Amber's on my team.
Hello, I'm Amber. I am the DE&I coordinator. I work underneath Alayna. I've been at Sledge for 2 years now almost, which is really cool. It's my kind of like first job in the actual industry. I graduated from uni with a games degree and I signed up. I enlisted. I came
and found you. And yeah, we also have Isabelle Brown, who is, unfortunately, she was meant to be here but can't make it. So she's watching us from Canada. And we, can kind of talk to you about some of the things that she does on our team as well. But yeah, unfortunately couldn't make it with us.
She's in here. I'm not nervous. I'm just channeling Isabelle.
Yeah, anytime she pauses, she's just wondering what Isabelle would say. I promise she's real. I promise Isabelle does actually exist. Cool. So that's the 3 of us, and that's kind of the perspective that we're bringing. So this is a slightly prolonged analogy. Bear with me. So DE&I, a lot of different things go into it. Diversity, equity, and inclusion has all these different components. And some of them are things that people are already doing. Some of them are things that maybe you haven't thought about or haven't realised are part of the DE&I conversation. But these are some of the main things that when I took up this role and started this department, I had to start thinking about. Some of them Sledge was already thinking about and doing something on. Some of them were a little bit patchier. But all of that kind of feeds into this central DE&I thing. For some studios, if you're an independent studio, you don't have a person doing every single role. You don't have that level of specificity. I've worked in indie studios as well, and I know what it's like to kind of have someone pick up the slack for whatever it is that they're passionate about, right? And so you end up with something sort of like this sometimes, where you've got like some sort of studio head who's doing things like figuring out which universities we should partner with, or, oh, maybe we should support this charity because I care about them, or whatever. You end up with a creative director maybe, or like a really passionate artist on the team, or someone who is like, hey, representation is really important, we should do better in this space, and they kind of champion that. You end up with a producer maybe who is like, hey, we should really improve L&D on our team. But those responsibilities end up getting taken on by people as kind of an extra thing that they're, doing. You might have a producer who likes to run the events that happen, and they go, oh, we should do something for Pride. We shouldn't just do breakfast for no reason. We should do something for Pride, or we should do something for whatever. And so you end up with a fairly small group of people kind of chucking puzzle pieces into the centre and being like, here's our DE&I goals, here's our DE&I plan, without necessarily communicating with each other about how those pieces fit together. But you end up with some things happening, which is great, but it is often as a secondary to kind of their primary role. In a larger studio, you end up with a similar sort of setup a lot of the time. And this is basically what Sledgehammer looked like when I kind of started this department and I said, hey, we need someone kind of centralising and managing this vision. And so all the same boxes, but that was divided between, like, we have a HR department, we have those sorts of resources, we have an operations team, we have people who are able to kind of specialize a lot more in some of these areas, but you still have this same issue where you have a bunch of different people who are like, oh, we need to get better at inclusive hiring, and they chuck in their puzzle piece, but there's no one necessarily managing the central picture. There's a lot of people with a lot of great puzzle pieces, but someone needs to kind of do the middle bit. And so enter DE&I team. Revolutionary. So this is essentially what we try to do. We manage the picture, we figure out where all the pieces fit, and then we communicate back out to those groups, and we still need that support. We do a lot of the work as well, like we're in the game and we're doing a lot of these things with this, like with these teams. We're not just being like, hey, operations, you sort it out. Like we're collabing and working with them. But it's definitely not like we do it all and we took it all away from the people who were doing it before that. It becomes this really collaborative conversation that happens. And essentially we're saying, hey, what puzzle pieces have you got? Oh, awesome. Let me put them in this picture. Ooh, there are some gaps here. I can't see the full picture. I'm going to need to do something to fill those gaps up. And it just means we have a centralization on that vision and that, like a central view of what's going on at the studio. So that's my laboured analogy. Thank you. So that brings me here, right? So one of the things that I have to do, which Amber hates because I say the word strategy and she hides under a blanket and goes, don't talk about strategy, it stresses me out, is building a strategy, building that picture, figuring out what that's going to be. And these particular kind of little pillars that I have here, I literally finalised 2 weeks ago. The first strategy that I made was when I first took on this role about 2 years ago, and that strategy covered a lot of these same areas, but it was a little bit fuzzier around the edges, right? It was my first strategy for a AAA studio. I've done DE&I work for years, but it was my first time thinking, how am I going to improve DE&I for 600 people who come to this office every day and, you know, need support and need to feel included? And, you know, I think I did okay. And that was the kind of thing that drove us being able to hire people like Amber and people like Isabelle and, you know, being able to get buy-in on some of these strategies. But it was in the last couple of months, I was like, all right, we need to level up. So this is the level up, which means I can give you some great tips on how to make a DE&I strategy because I just did it again. And so what I would say is start with some sort of vision statement. Start with like, what's the end, like what's the vision for how we want our studio to look? Then list out all the different goals, intentions, actions, outcomes, all the things that feed up into that vision. And so that vision for us is basically like to become innovators in the space of DE&I and to demonstrate to people what best practice can look like in this space. That's not where we're at. It's not where we are now, but it's where we want to be. And it's a vision that we're going to keep chasing. And so what we did was take all of the different actions and goals and outcomes that can feed into that vision, and then we categorised them into a bunch of buckets. So we figured out, like, okay, what's an intention that we're never going to quite be able to achieve? You know, like, make our games more accessible. It's not an achievable goal because you can literally just keep doing that and doing it and doing it and doing it and making it better. We had kind of a bucket of those things, which is like things to keep chasing, aspirational stuff. Things that are actions that are solvable and finishable, like we're going to train every single manager on these foundational management skills. Great, that's a thing you can then say you did. Although then you get more managers and you have to do it again, but bear with me. And so we've kind of put all of that together and we came up with these headings. And these are going to kind of drive the rest of this talk. So we're going to talk about kind of what we do in these spaces. And then we're also going to talk about the ways they interact, because the point of this is we don't silo out our diverse games bit or our diverse studio bit. We try as much as possible. There's a reason why the one team manages content stuff and external partnerships and internal inclusivity. And it's because each of those areas like feeds the other in a really significant and meaningful way. And so as an example, Amber's going to talk a little bit about what she does in her day-to-day and how it, you know, all feeds itself.
So, I basically play COD all day, every day. I love it. It's my dream job. A lot of that entails content review. So a lot of the job that I do is I'm in the maps, I'm in the levels, I'm checking to make sure things are authentic. I'm checking to make sure that we don't, put anything offensive in our games. I'm in the conversations early, so I'm making sure that we're not doing anything reactive and we're being proactive about what we put into our games. I also support our interns as well. So I'm not only in the games, but I'm supporting our interns who are in the games, which is something that I'm really, really passionate about. I think a lot of our interns come from different diverse backgrounds, which feed into what I look at when I look into the games and I look in the maps. I also do a lot of community outreach. So we not only take in interns, but we're thinking about, all right, how do we now influence the future generations of people who are going to be making the games and playing the games? So I'm doing work with high schools at the moment, which is really, really cool and really, really fun.
And so, like, as a person who kind of gives you the sorts of things that you do, and I'm like, here's some stuff. For me, part of it is like, what gets Amber excited? And it's like, her interns. I know that she literally calls you her interns.
Shout out.
Well, shout out to, yeah, it's so good. And for me, like, giving people things that they're really passionate about, obviously they do an amazing job at them, that's part of it, but I never want to just give you maps to review or content to do or research to do, because I think that the conversations that you have with that group of interns gives you a perspective on your maps that you wouldn't otherwise have. Do you agree?
Yeah, absolutely.
Hello. You just keep doing this as you... You're like, if I don't have the microphone in my mouth, no one can hear me speak, it's fine.
So my interns, I absolutely love them. I love working with them. We grab our interns from so many different backgrounds. We grab them from universities and TAFEs and everything like that. And I think that feeds into my content review. It feeds into, the way I look at, reaching out to high school students as well. Like, I'm super passionate about our interns, because I think if we can introduce our interns and our high schoolers to DE&I early, it no longer becomes something that we're trying to teach people. They come into the industry and they're already thinking about it. They're already looking into it, and I think that creates, a cascade effect where, in the future, no one's being forced to do DE&I. It just comes naturally to them. And I'm not talking about just making sure that our game isn't offensive. I'm talking about making sure that, we're hiring diverse voices, because diverse voices, make diverse games, and diverse games are really fun to play.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of games, let's talk a bit about how we make our games more diverse.
Sweet. So I'm going to go into each little category here. What goes into making my content review, first of all. So being proactive. First of all, I'm in a lot of pre-production talks. We like to get on the tables, get into the doors, get into the rooms.
Get into the rooms. You've got this. It's fine.
I like to get into doors.
Did we mention recently that she usually just plays the game?
Sorry, Isabelle's speaking to me. I think getting into the maps and not only being, reactive and looking at them after everything's been done, being able to get into the rooms and be in early ideation talks and being really proactive about how we do things. I think that opens the door a lot, especially for our developers, like our environment artists, our level designers as well, because we're giving them time back. We're allowing their creativity to flow and giving them new ways to look at things. I also do a lot of research for these. We're wanting to do a map in a certain place, and someone tells me about it, and I'm like, heck yeah! I'm like, I can go find consultants for this. You have this really niche thing that you want to do. Absolutely, let me look into it. Let me see some really cool ways that we can put that into our game. Something that's really authentic.
And I think early on when we first started doing this, and I was like, hey, Amber's going to be in some of your conversations, there was a little bit of a feeling of like, oh, she's going to come and tell us what we can't do. But I think that the best value that you've brought, and this is, you know, what we hear from the team now, and people are inviting you in because it's not about what we can't do. It's about, hey, what about this thing that we could do that you haven't thought of? What about this cool, diverse thing that you didn't realize existed? Or, oh, you want to do that thing? Great, well, tell me early and we'll figure out how to make it happen. Like in the last year and a half that you've been working here, how often do you say no to people, right?
It's gone from a lot to none.
Like we managed to kind of make things work. The sooner we're in the room, the easier it is to achieve that.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I think that gives our creators like a lot more time back and a lot more freedom to be able to create these environments and these assets without having that little that black cloud over your head of like, oh, what if I do all this and they're gonna just tell me no, you can't do that. Like I think it's been really beneficial for our entire studio that we're in there early, we're helping instead of being something that's a negative. I think we're seen more now in a positive light, which I think's phenomenal. Like and people are starting to not only think about DE&I in an artistic or creative sense, but they're starting to do that on their own now without having to ask so many questions, which is really cool. Really
yeah,
cool.
like we're getting things brought to us now that are already in such an interesting, diverse state that it's like they clearly had a little Amber in their head kind of being like Isabelle's in yours, they had a little Amber sitting on their shoulder being like, ooh, what cool things could we do here? And it's cool that they are kind of doing that themselves, because like we're only a team of 3, we could grow, but ultimately what we need to do is be changing and creating a cultural shift so that everybody is thinking about this differently, rather than us having to be like, oh, good, how are we going to divide every single room between 3 of us this week? We need to make sure that our influence is in those rooms anyway.
Cool.
Yeah, and I mean, as part of making inclusive or diverse games, we're also looking at things like accessibility and disruptive behaviour. Do you want to talk a little bit about what we're doing there? I know half of it is NDA, but...
Look, we're doing stuff.
We can gently hint at some of the things we're doing there.
Look, I think I think all of this, obviously, all of our pillars feed into each other, and I think everything underneath those pillars also feed into each other, because I think without, I'm really passionate about accessibility. I think games are for everyone. Everyone should be able to play games, no matter who you are, where you are. You should be able to play games. Games are considered an escape from reality, and I think everyone should be afforded that opportunity. So I'm really passionate about including accessibility features in our game, and I think we're making some strides. I'm gonna not NDA it. We're making lots of
progress.
Progress.
Vague. I like it.
Progress. We're making progress. We're making progress in not only our features, what you see on the front end, but we're also making progress in our back end features. So things you don't obviously think about, when it comes to games. I know everyone thinks about accessibility and they're like, let's change the text size. Let's make sure that, people who can't see the whole range of colors are able to play the game. And I think that's really fantastic as well. But we're trying to take it a step further and think about, okay, well, how can then we expand on that? And I'm trying to talk without saying stuff I shouldn't.
Nailed it.
Thank you.
Great. And then that kind of expands into our disruptive behaviour, which is what we are now calling our anti-toxicity stuff as well. I am kind of keen on like a community behaviour type title. I don't know, something a little bit less about the negative, because one of the big things that we're trying to do in that space is not just focus on negative behaviours, but also on positive behaviours and what we can be doing to improve,
reward your positive.
Yeah, and increase them. Yeah, exactly. And so there's like not just discouraging bad behaviour, but also increasing and encouraging good behaviour, and working out what's like which is which. And it's Call of Duty. Is camping disruptive? Kinda, but it's also the point, isn't it? Like, I was 14 once, I know. But also, like, there are certain disruptive behaviours that are making it a really unpleasant game experience for people. And so which of the behaviours are the ones that we're targeting, and how are we going to continue to kind of evolve those practices and those processes along with the people who are playing our games, who are continuing to iterate on their techniques.
Which leads back to accessibility. Everyone should be able to play games. You shouldn't not want to play Call of Duty because you're afraid that some gamer bro is going to yell at you. I've had that personally. I hate that, and I think it's stupid. So I think we're trying to think of disruptive behaviours in a different light. So instead of fighting fire with fire, it's like, all right, so how can we switch it up? How can we kind of keep trying to fight that battle, but then encourage different aspects in the game that bring people together as a community?
Totally. And we're definitely not the first people to have that bright idea, but
Nope.
It is something that we can kind of be learning from and collaborating on and continuing to add to our titles as well.
Absolutely.
Anything else on diverse games that you wish to add?
I think I've covered it.
Nailed it. All right. So, like I said, I have this kind of divided on here purely because it makes it easier to talk about and not forget things. But it's so important to me that these feed into each other, right? So we talked a little bit about how an inclusive and diverse studio makes more inclusive and diverse games. That then leads to having more inclusive and more diverse players and kind of more equity in that space. More people then, it's very common in this industry that people apply for jobs who are making games that they see themselves represented in. And so you also get that player base potentially leading to diverse applicants, which then leads to having an inclusive studio. And so it all kind of cycles and feeds itself. And so it's really, really important to me that we are thinking about these things and the ways that they connect to each other. And so that also kind of leads to some of the things that we do as in cultivating an inclusive studio that is kind of not what people would typically expect a DE&I team to be doing. And that said, we do heaps of collaborative work with other departments. But for example, when we're looking at things like learning and development, that covers things like allyship training, cultural competency training, those things that you would kind of typically think a DE&I team is doing. But we're also really working really closely with our HR team on our management and leadership training. Because in my opinion, and this drives my team a little bit crazy sometimes, literally anything is a DE&I issue if I want it to be.
Everything is her issue.
I can make anything a DE&I problem. And so the argument with manager training, right, is if every single person in the studio is being managed in a different way, how is that equitable? If not everybody has the same understanding of their expectations and their role, and they're not given the same opportunities, and their managers aren't equally putting them forward for promotion and all those things, how is that equitable? The E in DEI is equitable, equity, right? So it's my problem. It's all my problem. And so we're working really closely with HR on things like that. And then in addition to things like leadership training and supporting our leaders, we're also trying to democratize our ability to train our team as well. So when I first kind of came in, I was very kindly given some money to help with coaching. And to begin with, it was executive coaching was what it was called, right? Because we had X amount of money and it went to about 10 coaches and generally went to 10 of the highest directors in our studio. And I said, hey, what if instead of doing it that way, we went to this other group that has more coaches for less money, more licenses, and we open it up and we get people in there that are juniors, people who are mid-level, people who might be leaders one day but aren't yet, people who aren't managing people yet but we want to set them up for success. And they were like, yeah, hell yeah, let's try it.
I did. Yeah. It's the best thing I ever did.
So we now have a program where 35 people every 6 months from all sorts of, so we still have execs in there, but we also have juniors and mid-levels and all sorts of departments engaging with a coaching program and can spend 6 months doing one-on-one coaching as many times as they want for that 6 months. And yeah, Amber was one of...
It's a blessing, absolutely. I called her my work psychologist. I was able to come to her with work problems. She was able to coach me on time management. She was able to coach me on like advocating for myself. And as a junior, geez, isn't that valuable?
Absolutely. And like that takes us to team advocacy, right? Like we're trying to create opportunities for our team to be able to have those conversations for themselves, to feel comfortable and confident in a room with their manager and be able to advocate for what they need. And that can be anything from, I have autism and ADHD. Sometimes I need things in those rooms that the average person might not need. And it can be really hard to be like, hi, sometimes I'm a tiny baby and I would like to be treated in these ways, thank you. And so you need to kind of have certain ability to advocate for yourself, to be vulnerable, to have those conversations. And that is a skill that can be taught. And so that's something that we're trying to work on, not just for who you would typically expect DE&I to be helping, but for everyone, right? Like literally everyone in the studio could benefit from those skills. The other thing that we do a lot in this kind of inclusivity space for inside our studios is observances. So I think that is one thing that a lot of people do associate with DE&I teams, which is things like Pride Month and Black History Month and Asian Pacific Heritage Month and all of those different sorts of events. We are no different. We do celebrate a lot of those things, but it's really important to me that that's not the only thing that we do, because that is so tokenistic and it needs to be backed up with the things like, oh yeah, and we also train every single manager in our entire company. Like it needs that weight behind it to actually mean anything. As of this year, I think we're doing 53 events per year. Which is ridiculous, and mostly Isabelle. So shout out to Isabelle. But we are basically working through a whole range of different things that you might not expect. And what's really important to me in that is that it's not just the people who directly relate to that event or that observance that benefit from it. There is an educational component and a visibility component that is vital, in my opinion, when you're talking about these different identities as a studio and you're doing it basically every week on average. That's super important for just creating that education. And it's also about creating an atmosphere of inclusivity where even if you're not the person being represented by XYZ event that's being celebrated that week, you're like, nice. Another inclusive event for my inclusive studio, and I feel really like this is a safe space that I can exist. And 3 weeks from now it'll be one for me, and that's awesome. So for me, there's like several reasons why we do have a pretty robust annual calendar of those sorts of events. And it's not always just a morning tea. Like sometimes it is, and those are great. Free morning tea is fantastic. But it's also things like partnering with organizations, donating time, donating money, mentoring, those sorts of things. We also spend a lot of sponsorship on different groups. We do various types of merchandise. This was a Pride shirt. So we do kind of a spectrum of things, and a lot of educational pieces, a lot of speakers, a lot of stuff like that as well. So we try to kind of diversify and vary the things we're doing for those observances so that people want to continue to engage with them and they're getting a variety of things out of them.
Absolutely.
Cool. And so speaking of those partnerships that we are creating with kind of people outside of the studio, that brings us to the third point, which is building meaningful relationships. And this, I was going to say that naming pillars is really hard. Don't be mean to me.
I received 141 Slack messages at 3:30 in the morning.
I mean, you didn't
between her and Isabelle
at 3:30 in the morning
trying to name this last pillar.
It's fine.
And I got to the end of that 141 messages and there was still no decision made.
It's fine. So, okay, first of all, you woke up to a bunch of messages, but you know how to mute your notifications, and that's great. Good, I'm proud of you. If you have insomnia, I highly recommend hiring someone in a ridiculous other time zone so that when you're up at 3:30 going, what the hell do I name this pillar? You've got someone in working hours that you can just be like, what the hell do I name this pillar? Isabelle's very supportive of my insomnia. Bless her heart. Anyway, build meaningful relationships. It's fine. It's doing its best, okay? That it tells you what it's doing. It's fine. We build relationships with people outside our studio. You get it. It's good enough. Anyway, so there's kind of three main things here too, right? So there's these partnerships that I was just talking about where we work with different charities and community orgs and groups to try and give them whatever we can in terms of a collaborative relationship. And sometimes that is just literally donating money and saying, see you later. Sometimes that is having a long-term and collaborative, like, back and forth relationship with those groups. We have a whole variety of those on our slate now. It comes down to things like inclusive hiring, where we are working with, a whole bunch of different orgs on how to get inclusive voices into our studio. And it's also about industry transparency. It's things like this, where I'm literally like, hey, do you want to see my entire strategy document for DE&I over the course of an hour and then ask me questions later? Let's do it. This is the sort of thing I think is really important. And so, like, I have on there, rising tide lifts all boats, because that comes back to what we were saying before about training all of our managers. It improves every single person to varying degrees, to the point where you end up kind of on the same level. And that's what equity is, right? Like, the boat on the far right is clearly rising a fair bit more than the one on the left. But ultimately, they're all rising and we all end up in a really cool place together. And so that's the goal. We're trying to kind of continue to lift everybody up and get us all onto a more equal playing field. So my big thing is that I feel like we have a corporate responsibility to give back to the community that we're a part of. And I would feel terrible if, as bloody Call of Duty studio who is selling buttloads of games, we're just sitting over here on our own being like, have fun. Like, we have a responsibility to give back financially, socially. We have so much social capital. We have so many players. We have so many people on social media following what we do. And we have so much expertise in our studio. Like I said, we have 600 people, and there's 600 of the most talented people I have ever met. And then if you start to think about all of Activision, that gets to be quite a large number. And so what I kind of really advocate for, and I feel like everyone in this room, no matter the size and scale of your studio or the work that you're doing, you have something, right? You have some expertise, some opinion that somebody else doesn't have. You have some amount of financial capital, but perhaps you might have people that you know and can connect with each other. You always have something that you can give back. And we're extremely privileged that what we have is pretty significant, because again, it's a Call of Duty studio and that's a blessing. But I've also been a freelancer. I've also worked indie. I still feel strongly that even in those sorts of circumstances, there's always something that you can be giving back and collaborating on. Do you want to talk a little bit about the hiring side?
Inclusive hiring practices then. So I think, following on from our corporate responsibility and, trying to find those diverse voices to, bring into the studio fold so we can continue making really cool games with really cool experiences. A lot of it comes down to our hiring practices, like who we hire, where we hire them from. So not only hiring people that are straight out of university with a university degree, but hiring people from TAFE, reaching out to, our other communities, unrepresented communities, and, finding people who might not have had the chance to, I'm finding words so difficult today, might not have had the chance to, break into the industry, I suppose, And
people who are self-taught, people who have a degree in something else, and then
we have so many people that are self-taught.
So
many people that are self-taught. We have so many people who we've got some. Actually, I think we've got probably less people who are university trained. And I'm talking about trained in like games
like
and IT and stuff like that. We've got so many people in our studio that are, have degrees in ancient philosophy, which is wild.
Like you end up in these weird, my degree was in teaching and my doctorate's in creative writing and I do this, right? Like you end up with these weird pathways, and those are the people where you get these amazing diverse voices. And like one of the points around inclusive hiring is hiring manager training. So a massive part of how we increase our diverse workforce is by training our hiring managers to make more diverse choices. And that can be really hard sometimes, because sometimes a hiring manager is in a hurry and they put out a role and they go, I want someone who's done exactly this to come and do exactly that here, please.
Because I need them yesterday. Here's the box.
Exactly. Yeah. Please fit here. Thank you. And I get that, right? Like we're in a really fast-paced industry. We kind of need things quickly. But what I have found in my own experience, especially, hiring you and hiring Isabelle, which is like my primary recent experience in hiring people, but also being involved in hiring panels for others, is that if you approach that more from a space of what values you want to see in a person, what shared values, what foundation your team's going to have, you absolutely didn't have the skill set yet to do the job that I wanted you to do. You'd never done it before. But I knew that you had the desire to grow and you had it in you to be able to do it. And so I went, great, I'll train you, let's go. And it's a way easier to train you on technical skills like how to get into an environment art map on a proprietary tool than it is to teach you the value of everyone should be able to play games, and I have a massive passion for that, right? Like that's way harder to teach. And so same with Isabelle, right? Like she has kind of a legal aid background. She'd never worked specifically in DE&I before, but she's fantastic at talking to people. She's amazing at creating relationships, both within her company and with other partners. That's what I needed. Like I'm kind of creating a team of people who have different skills and different passions and things that they're interested in. And for me, it's those kind of innate values and those things that drive you that are far more important. And so having kind of like working with our recruiters, and our recruiters are amazing. They do a lot of this stuff already, and we can kind of just consult with them and help them out with like job description wording sometimes and stuff like that. But helping them to, you know, train our hiring managers and getting in our hiring managers' ears and saying like, hey, like here are some of the benefits to doing it this way.
Think outside the box.
Exactly, totally. Any more on hiring?
I'd love to talk more about my interns. I would hire all of them.
I know you would. And then, yeah, lastly, we talked about this a little bit already, but sharing transparently is like such a massive part of what I care about and what I value, and therefore what I've tried to kind of instill in my team. And, you know, I often, even within Activision Blizzard King, sometimes get people being surprised that I'm like, oh yeah, here's all my documents, here's all my plans, here's all the ways I've done this thing. You get people, we're all in the same NDA, we work for the same overall company, and they're like, oh wow, you're just going to share that freely? And I'm like, yeah. Yep. Do you want to learn things from it? Go for it. And like, do you want to criticize some of it? Absolutely. Like, hit me up. Give me feedback. Do you want to try it and tell me how it goes? Hell yeah. Like, I am an open book with a lot of this stuff. Like, obviously the specifics of like what we're doing on the game that's coming out in a couple of months is not something I can say on this stage at GCAP. But in terms of our strategy and the ways that we're doing things, I am an open book. I'm more than happy to share what we're trying, what we failed at, what didn't go as well, what risks really paid off for us. And you'll see me in, you know, a few years doing a similar version of this talk, being like, oh, all that stuff that Pastor Alayna said, stupid. I've learned so much. 3 new pillars. I've been through 5 iterations since I last saw you. How many Slack messages do you think? Anyway. And so, yeah, like I'm super open. So if you ever want to reach out to me or to my team and you have questions, you want to, you know, jump and have a chat about the sorts of things that we're doing, I'm super keen to do that. So that brings us to our takeaways.
It's not just because it has a KFC logo.
It's part of it. All right, I was just checking the time. All right, so number 1, diversity, equity, and inclusion is most effective when it informs and influences every part of the studio. And that's the whole point, right? Like holistic approach to DE&I. That's the vibe. So for me, that point justifies me sticking my nose into everything and making everything my problem. Because everything can be a DE&I problem if you try hard enough. I could literally get that as a tattoo. I feel like that is everything. If you try hard enough, if you want it to be your problem, if you see something and you're like, that really upsets me, you can find a way.
That's an equity problem.
Absolutely. It's got to be a diversity and inclusion or an equity problem, or maybe all 3. Like, there's a way. I promise. I've tried it. I want us to evolve our thinking about what DE&I is. DE&I is a discipline. It's not just a thing that some people do as part of their role. DE&I is its own discipline. That is my strong belief. And it is a discipline that can cover a huge range of skill sets and strengths, and they are stronger when they work together and they collaborate together. Creating an overall DE&I strategy and centralising DE&I efforts is really, really important. So even if you don't have somebody who works at your studio or, you know, in whatever space you're in who can be, you know, full-time DE&I manager like we have, I know that's a very privileged position that we're in, still working together to figure out a strategy, figure out what the jigsaw puzzle is in the middle before you start throwing pieces into it is really, really important, because all of those things can feed into and inform each other in a really meaningful way.
Absolutely.
DE&I should be an integral part of pre-production if we want to make truly inclusive games. DE&I is not something that you can tack on at the end. You can't add accessibility features as a last-minute thing. You can't, create...
You can, it's just really obvious.
Not well.
And tack it, yeah.
You can't do it well. You can't just at the end go through and be like, oh, that's offensive, that's offensive, that's offensive, take those out and now it's perfect. Because there's no heart, there's no authenticity, there's no, yeah. Exactly. You miss so many opportunities by doing it that way. It's also less fun.
Oh, it's so fun.
It's so boring to go in there and just be like, no, that's not my favourite part of my job. DE&I learning and development extends beyond things like allyship, cultural competency, all those things, which are also important, but it involves investing in our people and teaching them to be better leaders. It's everybody in the studio. It is picking out our leaders early and really investing in them from the beginning. It's getting all of our managers on the same page. It's setting expectations. It's creating our role descriptions. It's all of that stuff. So again, if you want it to be DE&I's problem, it can be. We have something of value that we can share with others simply by being in this amazing industry. Every single person in this room has something that they could be contributing to the DE&I effort, whether that be teaching somebody who otherwise wouldn't get an opportunity, whether that be being an underrepresented person and going and speaking to somebody who has never been an underrepresented person and saying, hey, this is what that's like, FYI. Whether it be having financial capital, whether it be having social media followers, whether it be knowing two people that you're like, you know what, you guys would really be beneficial if you knew each other. You guys should talk. All of that stuff can help further this kind of DE&I landscape. So think about what you have and what you can contribute, because I don't think it's only up to AAA studios who have a great amount of privilege in this space to contribute to this space. It's absolutely part of our corporate responsibility, but it's not just ours. And lastly, DE&I initiatives and techniques should not be some well-kept studio secret, because KFC is doing fine, and we all know what the 11 herbs and spices are these days. You can Google them. And they're still selling chicken. So you're allowed to share things. You're allowed to share and be transparent and talk to each other, because honestly, it just helps all of us.
Diverse voices help create diverse games. And the more we talk about it, the better everyone's games are going to be, the better off the whole entire community is going to be for it.
Absolutely. Cool. And so that is our talk. So I'm no longer on the social media platform formerly known as Twitter, but you can find me on LinkedIn, and also feel free to email me. I do actually check those, and Amber's the same, so take a photo of that if you would like to chat with us. We are more than happy to. Otherwise, we can take a little bit of Q&A here because we have some time if you want. Does anyone have a question? Of course you do, Ben. Let's do this.
So as someone who's worked in the education sector and seen that the games industry is often not terribly happy with university graduates or TAFE graduates and what they come out of, I really find it interesting that you're sort of almost going with an apprenticeship model with your interns. And so I guess I'm just wondering what are some of the benefits and risks of that approach. Basically, I would just like Amber to talk about her interns.
I thought you'd never ask. With everything, with hiring, obviously there's going to be a lot of risk. I think the way I look at it is, coming from a university degree myself, my eyes were completely opened.
You can say mean things about my teaching, it's fine.
Ben was my teacher, he sucked.
How is my teaching, Emma?
It's fantastic.
Thanks, I'll pay you later.
I think university, obviously, degrees, they can be extremely valuable. You learn like a lot of technical skills. You learn, how to speak publicly. I have not excelled in that area. I think there's a big shift. I think there's a big gap between what they're being taught at university and what like the real world is. And my hope is to reaching out to interns and reaching out to high school students that I'm able to kind of like close that gap and kind of tell people you don't have to go to university to be in this industry. Obviously, there are pathways through university, and we do partner with a few universities and, you know, try to source candidates. But I think there's a lot of value in experience. And when it comes to, you know, hiring people, I'm not, you know, you don't necessarily need to look at a university degree because skills can be taught.
And to kind of add to that, like I know this was your opportunity to talk to you about your interns, but as someone with an education background, I worked with Ben. I absolutely see that same thing, right? Where like you have students who kind of come out of university with a certain set of skills and they don't necessarily know how to apply them into different contexts, and they don't have every skill that you would need to be able to do certain jobs. And I do sometimes think that there's a level of complacency that can come from doing a degree where you think, oh, I absolutely have learned everything that I need to know. Whereas somebody who is self-taught is like, oh my God, I need to go and learn everything and I don't know what I need to learn. I'm going to go and ask and I'm going to go and find out. And I'm going to... So, you know, the types of uni students that I always want to hire are the people who are doing a side project and reaching out to that person and trying to find something out. Because it's that same energy. It's that, you know, real kind of drive to figure out what the real world is like. And so that can come from a uni student, but it can also come from a whole bunch of different sources. But it is about that gap and how we fill that and what we can be doing as people in the industry to help fill that gap for students who are like, hey, am I going to get a job after this? It's like, maybe, but let's figure out how, you know?
And obviously, it's a huge risk, obviously, you know, hiring someone straight out of university, hiring someone straight out of TAFE. It is a really big risk.
Hiring anyone.
Hiring anyone, yeah.
Hiring anyone can be
is
a risk, right?
You can hire somebody who is an expert engineer on paper and they suck at what you want them to do.
Yeah. Who here's lied on a resume? Like, hiring is hard, right? And so I do think, and our talent acquisition team is freaking amazing at kind of sifting through and figuring out who, but it is so much of like a gut feel. And so I think there are a million different ways that we can kind of reach out and find a diverse workforce. And we just need to know that all of it is a risk, so we might as well take some more interesting ones.
Your teaching wasn't bad.
So I have like kind of a specific question. I work in QA, and I love all of these kinds of things. Like, as personally, I'm really passionate about them too. When you do your content reviews and stuff like that, do you work with the QA team much at all for that kind of stuff? Because they're in the game.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, because you're saying you're in those review meetings, and like I go to like kickoff and review meetings for all the content in our game, and so I'm like, cool, that's definitely like. Sometimes I do also try and advocate for those things in those spaces when I think of it, but it's not my main focus. But yeah.
No, obviously, yeah. And
We love QA.
oh yeah. QA has been an absolute blessing when it comes to reviews, absolutely.
Are you wavering because you're not sure what you're allowed to say in response? Yeah, I thought so, because we've been using QA quite a lot on this project in a way that we haven't previously. So on the project that's coming out very soon, but one of the big, really cool things in it is we happened upon someone in QA who had a little bit of extra time and had a massive passion for this work, and we were like, let's figure out how we can better integrate QA into our processes. And so that was awesome, and is basically leading me to be like, what if we had embedded QA in our processes all the time? And so I'm doing my best in that space, obviously hiring and resourcing and blah, blah, whatever, but absolutely love QA, want to work with QA more. It's very much a resourcing and kind of...
Yeah, because a lot of what you talk about, I'm like, I can see QA being a massive support for this kind of stuff. So that's
absolutely.
We
and
need
it
more
works,
QA support,
it works so well because like my ebbs
Always
and
more
flows
QA.
are like different from when like other departments would need them. So like, you know, QA is absolutely
literally the only thing stopping us is that every single other person is also going, always more QA, I need more QA. That's the only thing that sometimes gets in our way. I believe that this hovering... One more question? Perfect. One more question. Do you want to just like shout and I can repeat it, or no? That works. Either works.
They're recording Thank you for your presentation. It's a question about observances, and I guess how you would approach, especially when you have a smaller studio or small team where you might have 10, 15 people even, being authentic and respectful in providing those events, but also not making people feel uncomfortable if they might be the only person in a particular diverse group, or if that person's not, if someone from a particular group that you want to observe and celebrate is not even part of the studio at all. Like, how would you approach that when the team is smaller?
Yeah. Thank you. Do you have any thoughts on that, or do you want me to? You can formulate them while I start talking. So I think it's a really valid, concern question. I think there's always going to be that resourcing element when you only have a small studio as well, and you're also just trying to figure out what people care about. The number one thing I would say, and we did this too, even with our big studio, is rather than making assumptions about what the team wants to celebrate, I'd ask them. That can be through an anonymous survey. That can be through some sort of put up if you're in an office, you can put up a thing and people stick on the board what they're interested in, or if it's virtual, the virtual version of that. So I would start by outsourcing and finding out what people care about. I do the same thing with charities or orgs that we work with, where it's okay, what are you passionate about? And we worked out by doing that, we had a bunch of people who were really, really passionate about Clean Up Australia Day and those sorts of equivalent events, and we hadn't even thought about that. And I was like, oh, hell yeah. And then we were great, can we figure out a way to give people a day off for Clean Up Australia Day? And so that can kind of start you thinking in really meaningful ways. If 50% of your studio is Pride Month's my favourite, you can be well, we clearly need to do something really important for Pride Month. The other thing you can do is ask people if they're interested in having their story told, or be literally a lot of it for me is just outsourcing to the team and talking to them, and not being hello, only lesbian I know works here, but more hello, person that I know works here, what are you interested in? And would you be interested in sharing your story, whatever that story might be? And so trying to kind of approach it in that sort of way and know that every voice kind of matters, especially when you have a team that is a size where you could talk to everyone, and that is really cool. I don't know, is that helpful? Awesome. Anything you wanted to add? Perfect. And if you do think of a question, or you don't want to just shout your question out in front of everybody, or if you're I don't know how to word this DEI question without sounding weirdly offensive, my LinkedIn is open and I've heard it all. So feel free to come and, ask me something, be I'm sorry if this sounds bad, but, and I can be asking in good faith. No worries. And we can talk about it. It's fine. So hit me up, hit Amber up. And also Isabelle is available and does stuff. So in terms of observances and things, I'm sure she would have additional thoughts as well, because she does manage our observances calendar now way better than I used to. So yeah, we're more than happy to kind of chat with you further as well. So yeah, hit us up. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your GCAP. Thank you so much for coming. It was lovely to see you. Thank you.